with it. You want to just stop?
Operator speaking. Mark Prado of Action Legal Video, 132 National.
You think it is or is it?
I don't know. I haven't seen it. Do you want to just identify the witness?
Okay. This is the video deposition of the CEO of Philip Morris, James Morgan Jr., I believe. His deposition was taken in New York City, April 17 this year.
All right, so thank you. Go ahead.
You're here on this day, April 17th, 1997. The time continuously recorded on the videotape at the offices of Jones Day, Revis and Pogue, 599 Lexington Avenue, New York, New York. Take the videotape deposition.
Are you getting a
of
picture?
James Morgan in the matter of.
Are you getting a picture yet?
Versus Philip Morris et al. And Howard A. Engel and et al. Versus R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company et al. In the Circuit Court, the 11th Judicial Circuit in Fort Dade County, Florida. Case number is 914978.
Is there a picture on the other side?
CA22 and number 068445. Will counsel please introduce themselves?
Stanley and Susan Rosenblatt on behalf of the plaintiff classes.
David Hardy on behalf of Philip Morris.
Robert Heim on behalf of Philip Morris and the Able.
Philip Morris and for Tobacco Company. Stephen White, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company. So witness may be sworn.
Please tell me some testimony about the given proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so we got it.
I do.
State your name, please, and your business address.
James J. Morgan, Philip Morris, Incorporated, 120 Park Avenue, New York, New York, 10017.
What did you do to prepare for this deposition in terms of meetings?
I had several meetings for several hours each with counsel with Mr. Hart.
Who else was present at those meetings?
Mr. Heim was present at one of them, I believe, two of them. Intermittently, very intermittently, some of our corporate entities.
Now, when you say several meetings, give me your best estimate as to how many.
4.
And several hours, so each session lasted approximately how many hours?
Some of them lasted 2 hours, some of them lasted 4 hours. It's sort of an average of several hours.
When was the most recent meeting?
Yesterday.
You've been in the tobacco business for how many years?
I started with Philip Morris in June of 1963.
And you never worked for a tobacco company before that?
No, I graduated. It was 2 days after I graduated from college.
Okay. Did they recruit you
Yes.
while you were in college?
Yes.
A frank statement to cigarette smokers, what does that mean to you?
Nothing.
A frank statement to cigarette smokers was an advertisement taken out in just about every major newspaper in the country at a point in time, and was paid for by Philip Morris and other tobacco companies. And it had to do, generally speaking, with the subject of smoking and health. Having told you that, does that ring any bells?
I have some memory, although I think it fairly significantly predates my joining the company. I believe that maybe back in the 50s I heard about an ad.
Okay. From the time you got into the tobacco business right up until today, have you ever read a frank statement to cigarette smokers?
No, I have not.
You'll get a chance to do so later today. Veni, vidi, vici. Do those words mean anything to you?
Yes, they do.
What do they mean to you?
I believe they are on the crest, what I would call the Philip Morris crest, which is on a lot of our packaging.
those words mean?
I do not know Latin, never took it. I believe it means I came, I saw, I conquered.
Why would those words be on Philip Morris packaging? Who did you conquer? Who did Philip Morris conquer?
I have absolutely no idea why they're on Philip Morris packaging. Philip Morris, the tobacconist, started this name, Philip Morris, his name, 150 years ago this year when he opened a tobacco shop in London. I don't know whether he put it on, his first brand, I don't know where it comes from.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, to your knowledge, when Veni Vidi Vici first appeared on a product.
I have absolutely no idea.
So you don't know if it's been on for 2 years or for 30 years?
For 150.
Okay. And as you sit here today, the concept of I came, I saw, I conquered doesn't mean anything to you in the context of the tobacco business?
No, that's right.
Okay. Would this, in your opinion, be a legitimate interpretation of those words? To an outsider, obviously, the dominant force in the tobacco business for the last 20 years, approximately, or so, has been Marlboro. Marlboro is the absolute #1 king of cigarettes, right? In terms of sales.
Fair to say.
Okay. And by the way, was there ever another brand of cigarettes that was #1 as long as Marlboro has been #1?
I don't know the answer to that. It's certainly since 1963 and sort of understanding back maybe 10 years more in terms of industry sales and volume. Marlboro has been the #1 brand longer than any brand, I'd say, since 1950. Okay.
Now, the warnings that you're required to put on your products, which have been mandated by Congress, what does the warning say about cancer?
Well, the warning says about cancer that the Surgeon General has determined that cigarette smoking causes cancer, and there's some other things.
Okay, is that Surgeon General's warning true and accurate, or is it false?
That's to me, an interpretive statement. I believe it's neither true nor false, but it is a set of words that's subject to considerable debate and discussion.
Well, do you think it's subject to considerable debate within the scientific and medical communities?
No, I think that the scientific and medical communities have fairly reasonably concluded in their minds that the statement would be fair. But again, it depends on what you mean by the word causes.
Well, I mean, the cause has a common sense connotation, doesn't it?
No, I'm not sure it has a common sense connotation as much as it's a complex connotation. I think there are different levels of cause.
So if you're asked a direct question, putting aside for the moment the Surgeon General's warning, and you just ask straight out, as the President and CEO of Philip Morris, Inc., does Marlboro or Virginia Slims or Benson and Hedges cause cancer? What's your answer to that?
My answer to that would be that cigarette brands, cigarette smoking may possibly cause cancer.
And therefore logically extended, if cigarette smoking may cause cancer, then obviously you're selling a product which may cause cancer.
That is correct.
What is your knowledge of the research and I'm not asking you this from a technical, detailed standpoint, but I'm ask you a more general kind of question as to what is your understanding of the progress of scientific research when it may be anticipated that there will be an answer that will satisfy you one way or the other. Either cigarette smoking does or doesn't cause cancer and other diseases.
My understanding of the sort of the flow of scientific research, my general readings, I don't think I disagree with what you're saying.
Okay, so can you see in a practical sense, having described the process as you understand it, ever being at a point in time where one can, where you could definitively say, well, you know, here's the proof, it does cause cancer or it doesn't cause cancer, or is it your feeling based on your reading and from whatever other source that it's really going to always be pretty much an unknowable on the issue of pure causation?
I do not believe it will be an unknowable.
Well, what do you see? What can you conceive of an experiment or research that will satisfy you that it's no longer an unknowable?
You're asking the wrong person if you're looking for definitions of experiments, but I approach it on a common sense basis, which is there are many things that we all live with and deal with in our lives as human beings, where at one point in time it was not clearly understood the process by which things happen, and not just in the scientific or medical area. Just life, I think, is like that. But one of the marvels of our society and our culture and our history is that we tend to find the answers to those because we focus on them. And generally speaking, I think it's a fair characterization of the modern world to say we find more answers than we don't. So I have no reason to believe that the issues, the controversy regarding cigarette smoking and its role in disease won't be found and documented and where everybody can understand the steps along the way. It's just today it is an unproven fact, and it's very hard to make conclusive and sort of authoritative dogmatic statements about this until you know the mechanism and the process by which these things happen.
Well, the Surgeon Generals and the public health organizations, and the American Cancer Society, and the American Heart Association, and the American Lung Association, has apparently not had any difficulty making the association. Wouldn't you agree?
They've not had any difficulty making a statistical association and calling that cause. Those groups which spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year in research in these areas and are truly dedicated to finding these answers have not found the answer yet. They have not found the process by which one can take a lit cigarette and track it to disease in a human being, nor have they been able to determine why a lit cigarette for some people never tracks to a disease in some other people. It is still, from that viewpoint, it is still a very open subject.
But you will agree that from the standpoint of the organizations I just mentioned and the literature, the articles which appear in journals such as the New England Journal of Medicine, these articles generally start out with a proposition, and it's accepted by the public health community and all these organizations and the United States Department of Health and Human Services that cigarette smoking does in fact cause lung cancer and other diseases.
That is what they say.
Okay. That is what they say, and that's what they believe. You don't agree with them, but that's what they say, and that's what they believe.
No, I don't know what they believe. I know what they say, but I don't know what they believe about the word cause. And they are, in many cases, many of these people are very reputable people, but they do not define the word cause to the best of my knowledge. It's left as an open word. Nor do they document the process by which it is caused, because nobody knows that.
Look, if you and I knew each other and we were having a cup of coffee, and a guy walked into a restaurant and I pointed him out and I said to you, that guy's got cirrhosis of the liver, it's sad, because that's a serious condition. And then I tell you, the last 10 years, this guy has been drinking a fifth of vodka every night. for the last 10 years. And, obviously, the cause of the cirrhosis of the liver is drinking a vodka for the last 10 years. I mean, on a common sense cause, you'd accept that, wouldn't you, if my facts were correct?
In a sort of, if we were pals, as you said, in a common sense way, I probably nod my head, but I would not conclude that I knew that that's what caused it, because I know so little else about the person. I don't know enough to know. Again, as a non-scientist, just pals in a bar somewhere. I wouldn't know enough to know about the genetic history of his family. I wouldn't know what else he did in his life. Wouldn't know what else he drank and ate. I just wouldn't know so much that as a pal in a bar, I'd probably give you a head nod, but if I were a serious scientist or a doctor or a researcher, I doubt very much I'd stop at that conclusion. I certainly would have to investigate further.
Are you a smoker?
Yes, I am.
How heavy?
3 packs a week.
3 packs a week.
Mm-hmm.
Has there ever been a time during that time frame when you quit for a period of time exceeding a week?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that. The first time you attempted to quit.
The first time that I attempted to quit, and did quit, would have been I'm going to have to be somewhat young. I'm going to say late 1970s.
Okay.
Okay. I don't remember the specific year.
Okay.
The reason I decided to quit was really an intellectual reason. And it had to do with my job. And at that point, there was a lot of discussion in the media and sort of generally, excuse me, this water keeps. There was a lot of discussion in the media and sort of the folklore that cigarettes were hard to quit. And I hear stories about people who just, I had friends who said, I'm going to stop smoking, and I just stopped like that. And then there were clearly other people who had more difficult times with it. And I decided to quit for the principle of seeing if I could quit. There was no other issue than sort of a professional desire to say, for myself, I'd just like to see if this is really as hard as people say or as easy as people say. And I stopped. And I stopped for, again, don't hold me to the specific time, but I stopped for about 5 or 6 months, I'm going to say. Interestingly, my wife got smoking at that time, and we flip-flopped on this, as I tell you my history of it. My wife got smoking. I didn't find it difficult at all to quit. I did not miss it. I did do one thing which aided me personally, which is I carried a straw with me because I wanted again to understand what this was about. And I found myself from time to time when I felt like it was a moment that I'd enjoy a cigarette, I'd hold the straw. And that helped my hands at that time. I started up again because I didn't quit other than to find out what it was like, and sort of with the same degree of intellectual approach. I said I want to feel like the experience quitting. I started up because I enjoyed cigarettes and I wanted to start smoking again.
Okay, before I start asking you some questions about starting up, let's talk about this. Let me ask you a few questions about this time of approximately 5 to 6 months when you quit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, in terms of your description, obviously you would have proven your point by quitting for a week. In other words, you smoked for a number of years. You told me you wanted to test this theory, is it hard to quit, is it not hard to quit? And you quit. And
So what I'm saying to you is, why was it necessary to quit for 5 to 6 months when obviously you proved to yourself the point after 1 week?
I do not think that you proved the point after 1 week. I continued to smell cigarette smoke, to see people smoking, and also after 1 week, I continued to find cigarette smoking an appealing thing. So I wanted to go until I, again on an intellectual basis, just decided that I had satisfied myself as to my own personal feelings about what the subject of quitting was all about, and then I decided to resume smoking.
Now, in the late 70s, you were employed by Philip Morris?
Yes, I was. I was Executive Vice President of Marketing and Sales.
What brand or brands had you smoked from the time you began as a freshman in college up until the late 70s? A lot of different brands?
Take a break for a minute.
No, we don't need to.
Okay. I believe I smoked Palmetto and Lucky Strike when I was in college. And when I went to work for Philip Morris, I started smoking Marlboro. And I would say that Marlboro was my regular brand, although, of course, being in the business, I would try all our brands, and particularly, I'd say, in the late 1970s, I might have actually, for a while, switched to Merit, because I was deeply involved in the introduction of that brand. So I probably was sort of mixing between Marlboro and Merit at the late 1970s. Today, I smoke Marlboro Lights.
How heavy of a smoker were you when you quit in the late 70s?
Pack a day.
During your smoking career, what is the most smoke? I mean, were you ever a 2-pack-a-day smoker?
Yeah, I don't think so, no.
Was there a period of time, pack and a half? Or has it?
As a regular pattern?
Right.
No.
So, from college up until today, when you have been smoking, it's generally about a pack a day.
Yes, but that's not to say that there wouldn't have been days where...
More and less.
Yeah, sure. But if we're going to characterize it as a pack-a-day smoker's fair characterization.
To this period of about 5 or 6 months where you did not smoke a single cigarette, and I know 5 or 6 months is approximate. You went back to smoking.
Yes, I did.
The same brand that you had been smoking before you quit, or a different brand?
I don't remember.
Okay. And then you became a 1-pack-a-day approximately smoker again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you ever quit again?
Yes, I did.
Okay. When?
In 1983, in the summer of 83, I actually left Philip Morris for another job.
We are on the record. Okay, let's go back to your smoking history. You quit again in 1983, and why did you quit at that time? Quit smoking?
Basically, I was in California. My wife was in New York. Our youngest daughter was a senior in high school at that point. So we decided to keep her there. And we're sort of in California, new job, new location, and I just decided to stop again. No specific reason other than saying I've been smoking a long time and I'm just going to stop. No compelling desire, just sort of different surroundings. I thought I'd do it again.
Well, did this thought occur to you either at that time or any other time? Since I proved to myself that I can quit smoking without any difficulty, since there's a lot of stuff in the newspapers and a lot of doctors and a lot of scientists and the Surgeon General obviously say that cigarette smoking causes cancer and other diseases, you know, why smoke? And how long did you quit at that time?
Oh, boy. 2 to 3 months. 2 to 3 months.
And do you remember the circumstance causing you to decide to become a smoker again?
No, not really. Just decided. I enjoyed it.
Now, you say in 83 you were in California and you had a new job. What job was that?
That was the Atari job.
Okay. Where in California?
Atari was in Sunnyvale, California.
And you started smoking again after 2 or 3 months, and did you ever quit again?
Yes, I did.
When?
1987, I think it was. In the spring of 1987.
And why was that?
I had a collapsed lung at that point. It was called spontaneous pneumothorax, if I remember. Characteristic of tall, thin males, usually younger than I, at the time. And I stopped smoking after that.
Did your doctor tell you he thought it would be a good idea to stop smoking?
At that time, yes.
And you agreed with him? You agreed with him?
I didn't agree or disagree. Just
You just stopped.
common sense.
And how long did you remain a non-smoker?
8 or 9 months.
So that was the longest time that you were off
I'd
cigarettes?
say so.
Okay. So what caused your collapsed lung?
I'm not a doctor. Layman's language, what I was told, which is that it is a, what's that called? You're born with something.
Congenital?
Yes, thank you. That a lot of tall, thin males have a congenital thing where they have a weak spot, and that's not right. The lung collapses.
So what was your understanding of why you should stop smoking?
My understanding was that I didn't want to at that point because something had happened in my lungs.
But what, okay. And obviously when you inhale cigarette smoke goes into your lungs.
I think that's correct.
Okay. So you quit for 8 or 9 months.
Yeah.
Do you remember the circumstance where you started again?
Not specifically as an event, but generally I remember that I'd have a cigarette on like Saturday nights after dinner. And I'd start smoking a cigarette or two in a social occasion.
And then within a period of time you went back to your approximately half a day habit.
Or a little less.
Ever quit again?
Yeah. Intermittent doses. A lot of times if I go on vacation for 2 weeks, I don't smoke. If there'll be weekends that I don't smoke, there'll be days that I don't smoke. But yeah, I assume your question is a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, a couple of months or more. Okay. 87 was the last time you quit for a prolonged period of time.
I think that's correct.
How did you go about marketing the concept of tar, lower tar in cigarettes?
Could we, so,
Yeah.
that question?
Yeah, the background, to me as a layman, and looking generally at the advertisements, a selling point for some brands of cigarettes appears to be, my brand of cigarettes is lower in tar than the other guys, and therefore you should buy my brand. In other words, somehow low tar should be attractive to a consumer.
When I joined the company in '63, I would describe that as we'll have a discussion here about sort of a historical perspective on the U.S. cigarette industry. And when I joined in '63, tar was to some degree already an issue in the world of cigarettes. As early, I think it was 1953, what's now called the famous Reader's Digest article. The Reader's Digest ran a significant article. But at that point, I think the brand was Kent, identified Kent as a brand which had a filter that filtered out tar differently or more effectively than other brands. And Kent really skyrocketed as a brand at that point. I don't remember the numbers, but it went from a very small brand to a very significant brand. During the 50s, there were also all the filter brands introduced. And so by the early 60s, when I got there, tar was already in the vocabulary. And I would characterize my first 15 plus years of cigarette marketing as being very focused on tar because the consumers in this country were demonstrating that they would like to try lower tar cigarettes. So there were several things that were happening. One was the tar level of existing brands was being reduced. There were line extensions introduced, usually called lights, which were lower tar versions of the parent, and also during that period of time there were ultra low tar cigarettes introduced, all in response to consumers' obvious desire to try lower tar brands. The story goes on from there.
Okay, why do you think that consumers were expressing a preference for low tar? Wouldn't you agree that the reason for that preference was that in the consumer's mind at least, somehow low tar cigarettes were less hazardous to their health than high tar cigarettes?
I believe that the consumer was motivated by that.
Okay. And therefore, you as a marketer, as a businessman, obviously had an incentive to satisfy that preference.
We did introduce a number of lower tar brands during that period of time.
Did you believe then, or do you believe now, that lower tar cigarettes are in fact less hazardous to the smoker's health than cigarettes that are higher in tar? Cancer.
I don't believe that to be the case. I don't have enough knowledge to state that, therefore I have no basis to believe it.
From your standpoint, the difference between a low tar cigarette and a high tar cigarette is meaningless from a health standpoint, as far as you know. Isn't that true?
It could be true.
But you just don't know.
I don't know.
Just like it could be true that cigarette smoking causes cancer. You just don't know. It could be true, but you don't know.
It's possible.
Okay. What Philip Morris brand today is highest in tar?
I'm going to guess at this because I don't know it exactly. My guess would be it would probably be something like English Oval's non-filtered.
And what's the lowest brand in tar?
Merit Ultima.
Now, Merit Ultima, how many milligrams of tar?
1.
And the mainstream Marlboro brands, for example, how many milligrams? I know there are a lot of
I don't mean to
different
be tricky with you, but give me which half. What do you think is the mainstream?
You tell me the bestseller.
The bestseller is Marlboro Lights, and that's 11.
Okay. So what's the highest Marlboro?
16.
And which one's that?
Do it. Maybe, let me correct that, because Marlboro Hundreds full flavor, maybe 17, maybe 16. It's either Marlboro Hundreds or Marlboro Red.
Marlboro's incredible success too. Is it the cowboy motif or what?
I attribute Marlboro's success, which luckily and fortunately I've been able to be part of for so many years. I attribute its success to a variety of things. Early on we were talking about marketing, and I think I used the word integration. I think Marlboro integrates its product and total proposition extremely well. I think the product itself is a superior product. Secondly, I think its packaging is excellent. I believe its advertising is excellent. I believe its sales promotion programs are excellent. The quality and consistency with which the product comes, we spend a lot of time and a lot of money making sure that things like the tear tape on the cellophane are always in the right position and not defective. We really try and make that brand the highest quality brand that we can make. I think it's the fact that all those things have been done for so well, for so long, so consistently. Marlboro has not changed in basically 35 years. Its package is the same, its advertising is the same, its product is largely the same. It is Marlboro, it is reliable, it is consistent, and the consumers have a great sense of security and comfort and understanding that the Marlboro you get today is the Marlboro.
So that if someone smoked Marlboros 25 or 30 years ago and was in a Rip Van Winkle situation where they were asleep for 25 years and then today bought a package of Marlboro, it would essentially be the same tobacco product as it was 25, 30 years ago?
Yes, I think its tar has been reduced gradually over that period of time, but it would essentially be the same Marlboro.
Is Philip Morris suing the United States Environmental Protection Agency?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and where? Where is that lawsuit pending?
I believe it's in North Carolina.
To reveal any discussions you have with counsel, I'm asking you from a business standpoint, what is your understanding of what this lawsuit's all about?
From a business standpoint, my understanding is that Philip Morris and others object to the findings of the EPA based on several factors, which we feel make the EPA conclusions invalid in comparison to the methods and techniques by which they previously issued reports.
Have you ever read the EPA report?
Not the EPA report itself. I've read a summary of the EPA report.
Have you ever read any of the studies which were analyzed in the EPA report?
Not, I generally do not read technical data. I read what I would call layman's coverage of technical data.
Now, according to the EPA report, cigarette smoke is a Class A carcinogen, meaning it causes cancer in human beings. On what basis do you say that's not accurate?
Well, on several bases. First of all, the EPA, I believe, looked at 15 existing studies on the subject. It did not create any of its own research. So the EPA report was not a new piece of research. It was a study of existing reports on the subject. And as I understand it, of the 15 reports, 12 found no correlation at all between cigarette smoking or environmental tobacco smoke and disease. The EPA chose to use 3 of the 15 to base its conclusions on. In and of itself, as a layman, that seems somewhat unusual. But also, in an area I do know something about from market research techniques, the EPA also lowered its statistical confidence level that it used. The first time it ran the data from these reports and held to its 95% confidence level, the data, as I understand it, suggested no relationship to disease. So for whatever reason the EPA chose to do it, for the first time in their history, they decided to lower the confidence level from 95 to 90%, which in statistical terms is a very significant change. And when they ran it at 90% confidence level, the data just edged over the threshold of suggesting a statistical association between environmental tobacco smoke and disease. So I think this report's really shaky on fundamental grounds. It's also interesting that the Congressional Research Service, which is an independent part of the U.S. Congress, reviewed this report and found it to be very suspect.
you're talking about statistics. Actually, that's an area where you have some knowledge because marketing research techniques are based primarily on statistics, aren't they?
I'm comfortable with marketing research statistics. Yes. I'm not a statistician and certainly not an expert, but I can deal with them.
Yeah, but I mean, the manner in which marketing people reach conclusions is through statistics, through epidemiology to a certain extent, if you will, correct?
Yeah. Well, that's just not an accurate characterization.
Well, then give me an accurate characterization of the use of statistics to reach marketing conclusions.
There are a lot of different kinds of marketers. There are classically some marketers who use statistics totally to come to their conclusions. Totally. Yeah. Just that kind of person who won't take a step until they have a statistical base to make a decision on. There are intuitive marketers. There are people who won't even look at a statistic to come to a conclusion.
And then there's a whole gradation of people in between.
You're in the middle?
No, I think I tend to be a little more towards the intuitive side.
But you certainly are interested in statistics.
I'm interested in them, and I'd say I'm fascinated with them. I'm not an expert.
Where does your information come from that the EPA report is based on 15 studies?
From reading. I said I believe it is.
Were all of those American studies, or were some of them foreign studies?
I believe some of them are foreign studies.
You know how many out of the 15 were foreign?
No.
You know how many countries were involved other than the United States?
Not specifically.
The 1986, I want you to assume the 1986 Surgeon General's report reached conclusions that secondhand smoke was dangerous, hazardous to the health of non-smokers. So my question to you is, do you find fault with the methodology used in the 1986 Surgeon General's report?
I'm not sufficiently aware of the methodology used in that report to draw any conclusions as to its accuracy based on its methodology.
Wouldn't you agree that smoking has been banned on airplanes? Smoking has been banned in an enormous number of governmental facilities, including the Defense Department, the Pentagon, and other governmental agencies. Would you not agree that the reason smoking has been banned is because those individuals with the power to enforce bans have become convinced that secondhand smoke poses a health risk and danger to non-smokers?
I don't know what the people who are in position to make those decisions believe and don't believe. I live in the cigarette industry day to day, and political correctness is a factor in all this too. I hope that I never get to the point of drawing simplistic conclusions about why people believe things or do things. This is a very complex subject that's just gotten woven into sort of our whole society, and the views are so polarized. It's short answer is I don't know what their motives were and what their beliefs were in doing that.
You would agree, would you not, that in the medical and scientific communities there is a consensus that exposure to secondhand smoke in a non-smoker causes lung cancer?
I don't know what you mean by a consensus. I would say that it is in today's society, in this country, that it is a common belief that my smoke or my cigarette could be a health hazard to you.
So if I asked you as the direct question, does passive smoke, secondhand smoke, cause disease to non-smokers? What's your answer?
I would say that I do not know because I'm not a scientist like everything else, but that I believe that the evidence that when you strip aside
all the data and that you look at it with a clear, level, intellectually honest point of view, I would say that the data is very shaky in that regard. And that's what this lawsuit's about.
Which lawsuit?
The EPA lawsuit that you referenced.
The EPA conclusions have hurt your business. That's what the lawsuit's all about. Isn't that true? I mean, that's the business reason for the lawsuit. The EPA report, if believed by the American people and believed by people who ban smoking in buildings, and it's certainly banned in the great majority of buildings in the city in which you work, New York, that hurts Philip Morris's business.
Mr. Rosenblatt, your question is self-defeating, because as you say that this has become more and more prominent, that things have been banned, smoking's been banned, and everything else. Last year, the sales of cigarettes in the United States increased for the first time in about 12 years. So I don't believe that this lawsuit is at all about the business. I believe this lawsuit is about feeling like the truth has been twisted, like science has been manipulated, like there's a political agenda at play here, where people have stated their goals up front, where a report drew one conclusion in the beginning, and then the basis on which the data was used was changed to come to a different conclusion. I don't think this is about business at all. I think this is about honesty.
The president and CEO of Philip Morris, Inc., you would agree that your paramount responsibility is to your stockholders, correct?
Paramount, but not only.
Your second responsibility on terms of a listing would be to your customers, to your smokers, the people that smoke your product.
Probably by some small edge over other responsibilities.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that last year the sale of cigarettes in the United States of America actually increased.
The reported data was a 0.4%.
Okay. Is cigarette smoking addictive?
I need to answer that question with more than a yes or no answer. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues got put into a position where it was demanded that he answer that yes or no. And I don't think that's a question that can be answered yes or no.
You're referring to the congressional hearing?
Yes.
And they all said no.
That's what
And after you get done with your explanation, you're going to say no. Certainly, you're entitled to give your explanation.
Is that what you like?
Yes. When you get done with your explanation, and I'm going to certainly allow you to give your explanation because addiction is apparently a complicated subject to you. At the end of your explanation, aren't you going to tell me, and you seem like a very direct guy, who's not going to avoid a direct question, and the direct question is cigarette smoking addictive? And I have a feeling that when you get done with your explanation, you're going to say, no, it's not. Isn't that true?
Why don't you let me answer, and then you can draw the conclusion of what it's on. The subject of cigarette addiction is nicotine addiction or cigarette addiction. Is obviously over the news on people's minds. Just last night on CNN there was a show where some people were talking about it. And my view of addiction, cigarette addiction, is this. If you want to place addiction as a word, a definitional word, a semantic word, if you mean by addiction pharmacologically addictive, my answer is no, it's not. And the reason that I say no, it's not is that pharmacological addiction, as I understand it, depends on three things, neither of which, not one of the three of which, cigarettes really hold up to in the real world. The first one, again, as I understand it, is intoxication. And clearly, to me as a smoker and in the business and knowing other people who smoke, cigarette smoking is not intoxicating. You don't smoke a cigarette and all of a sudden become incoherent. You don't become babbly. You don't get in a car and drive it crazily into a telephone pole. Cigarette smoking does not lead to intoxication. So the first of the three legs of the pharmacological definition of addiction just doesn't hold up. The second leg of the definition involves, I forget the word, but what I call it is ever-increasing dosage. And that's classic of hard drugs. In the case of cigarettes, if you look at smokers, smokers do not increase the dosage of cigarettes. In fact, just the opposite. As people smoke for longer periods of time and as they age, the history of this industry is they go down the tar spectrum in brand selection. I started with Palmel, I went to Marlboro, now I'm Marlboro Lights, and I smoke Merit Ultra Lights from time to time. But the sales of this industry indicate that people go down the tar spectrum, not up. Furthermore, as people get older, they smoke fewer cigarettes per day on average. So that the whole dosage theory just doesn't hold up because in the real world, people don't increase their amount of smoking. The last leg of the three-legged stool of pharmacological addiction is that you need to have significant and singular withdrawal symptoms. And I also don't believe that's true with cigarettes. I believe it from my own experience. I believe it from watching my wife. I believe it from having friends. One friend, this ladies last Saturday night, said, when I stopped, I just stopped. There was no big deal. I made up my mind I was going to stop. I stopped. So I think most people would tell you that while cigarettes may be difficult to give up, there are not severe withdrawal symptoms. So pharmacologically, my answer is no. If you want to now shift the discussion from a pharmacological definition over to what I'll call to myself a behavioral definition of addiction, then I am willing to not say no. I am willing to say, in my judgment, from my own experience, that cigarettes may be behaviorally addictive if you use the behavior word in terms of the following characteristics. Cigarettes are pleasurable. No question about it. To a smoker, cigarettes are pleasurable. Cigarettes become part of your day-to-day life. No question about that. You use them as something in your hand. You use them because you like the warmth of the smoke. They are part of your behavior. I'm not at all embarrassed, afraid, or intimidated to say that I believe that cigarettes become part of your lifestyle and therefore may be behaviorally addictive. The level of addiction in that case, and I'm talking about behavior, to me relates mostly to someone's mind, how they think, what they need, and how they lead their lives. And in that sense, that's where I believe that cigarettes are, if they are behaviorally addictive or habit-forming, they're much more like caffeine or, in my case, gummy bears. I love gummy bears, and I just love them. And I want gummy bears, and I like gummy bears, and I eat gummy bears, and I don't like it when I don't eat my gummy bears. But I'm certainly not addicted to them. They don't have nicotine in them. They have sugar. Sugar. So I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but as I said,
I am too, but I wanted to show you the courtesy of letting you finish the three-legged stool.
So you can decide whether I said, if that was right that I said no.
Yeah, and behaviorally addicted, as you've used the term, does that also mean psychologically addicted?
We're going to start tracing into areas with words that I'm not sure I know the full meaning of. I said I was defining behaviorally myself. I believe that as I would use the word psychologically, I believe it could be psychologically habit-forming, yes.
Do you believe there is a category of people, a category of smokers, who have decided that they, based on the scientific and medical evidence that's out there, and based on their reading, they have decided that smoking is bad for them, and they want to quit? Let me finish. and they've made a decision, they want to quit smoking, they're starting to have some symptoms, they don't feel good, they think they wish they didn't smoke, and they've made a decision to quit, they try to quit, and they can't. Will you admit that there are a certain number of people, smokers, who fall in that category?
No. I believe that they haven't quit, but I don't believe they can't quit.
I've known a smoker who at least said to you they wanted to quit and told you they could not quit.
No, I do not know anybody who has ever told me that.
So you refer, you're proud of this country and all, and you refer to an informed, free, adult choice. Now, as I listen to your testimony, you're basically knocking the Environmental Protection Agency, that they reach certain politically correct conclusions and the data didn't support those conclusions. And you're sitting here April 17, 1997, when asked the very direct question, does your Marlboros or your Virginia Slims cause cancer? Your answer is you don't know. Now, my question to you is, well, if you're not informed, how can the average Joe on the street be informed about the health consequences when they hear you say, maybe it does cause cancer, maybe it doesn't?
I do not believe that what I said was literally, it may or may not, I don't know. I said I believe that it is possible that cigarettes cause lung cancer. I believe that's what I said. In terms of the public being informed, I think any reasonable person would agree that there are three common beliefs by the public about cigarettes. Common beliefs. Independent of whether they're correct or not correct, independent of whether they're substantiated with fact or not, there are three common beliefs that are widely held about cigarettes in this country. Number one is that cigarettes cause disease. People believe that. Secondly, that cigarettes... You don't. I believe they possibly can cause disease. That cigarettes are addictive. I believe people believe that. I've explained how I feel about it. And the third one is that I believe that everybody thinks that secondhand smoke is potentially harmful to their health. I'm not sure that a majority of people actually believe that secondhand smoke will affect them or hurt them or cause it, but I think that they're aware that there's a very large issue there. So when you talk about informed, I must say that I believe that the public is very informed on these issues. They may not be accurately informed, they may not understand the nuances and some of the issues and some of the debates, but the public's belief, in my judgment, is now and has been for a large number of years well ahead of the reality and knowledge base in the communities that ultimately decide these things.
For indoor air research.
Center for Indoor Air Research, I believe, is an organization, Center for Indoor Air Research. Center for Indoor Air Research is an organization that studies the quality of air in enclosed environments.
What has been your dealings with that outfit, if any?
Well, actually, about a year ago, I was put on the board of that organization, and I've been to one meeting, and I'm aware that they study, I think both initiate studies, but also I am aware that they study other studies that are being done around the world on indoor air research, on indoor air quality.
What is
is, or what was, the Tobacco Industry Research Committee?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's true that the great majority of people who have read in the newspapers in 94, watched that on television, when the CEOs were pointedly asked, does your product cause cancer? They said no. Is it addictive? They said no. Don't you agree, based on your earlier testimony where you told me about what you think the public's perception is on those issues? That being the case, don't you think the public perception was that the CEOs were lying?
First of all, I don't believe that the CEOs said, when they were asked the question, does cigarettes cause cancer? I don't believe they said no. I don't think that's inaccurate.
They said it hasn't been scientifically established that it causes.
That's a different thing, but I don't think they said no. With regard to addiction, I think I answered that earlier, which was I considered the situation they were in to be untenable, and personally, I would not, as an American citizen, have allowed myself to be put in that position of having to give a yes or no answer to a question that's much more complex and doesn't have a yes or no answer. And if they had been allowed to explain, I shouldn't say it this way, but I mean, if I took my views about what we talked about addiction, and explained my view of pharmacological versus behavioral addiction, and then I explained that, I don't think the American public would have thought I was lying.
But getting back for the moment to these ads, facts you should know, secondhand smoke, were you misled, how to spot flaws in secondhand smoke stories. This was a Philip Morris campaign to discredit the findings of the Environmental Protection Agency.
At least to raise questions about it.
Okay. And these were not ads trying to sell Marlboro.
That is very correct.
Okay. I'd like to have, I'm going to put these in as a composite, okay?
That's all right, as long as we know what all's in it.
Okay, let me go through. One ad is entitled "Secondhand Smoke: Our Position, Word by Word." What we've already talked about. Well, that was separate. That was a separate exhibit. How the EPA manipulated science.
That was number 9.
To serve a political cause. That was number 9. An ad titled "Were You Misled?" This week, read another side of the story about secondhand smoke. Another ad, the title of which is "Smokers and Non-Smokers, Facts You Should Know."
Wait a minute, that one. May I see that one?
Sure.
Oh, yes, all right. Got it.
Another ad, the title of which is "How to Spot Flaws in Secondhand Smoke Stories," and at the top, a subheading is "Secondhand Smoke Facts Finally Emerge." This is different. Another Philip Morris ad, "Were You Misled? This week, read another side of the story about secondhand smoke." And then another Philip Morris ad, this actually we have the date, June 30th, 1994 in the New York Times, the title of which is "How Science and Politics Collided and Balanced Reporting Was the Casualty." So we'd offer those ads that I've just recited as plaintiff's composite exhibit 10.
You want 9? I think I have 9.
Well, these are mine.
No, those are.
Yes, sir. There it is. That's it. service ads, Exhibit 9 and Exhibit 10, on the issue of secondhand smoke in the EPA. Can you tell us the cost to Philip Morris? I think all or nearly all of the ads appeared within, what, a couple of months in '94?
I don't know the exact cost. I'd say I don't know where each of them ran. So I remember our budgets. I'd say $5 to $7 million.
Now, you also had a series of public service ads on the accommodation program.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Reynolds also had a series of ads where they used the word accommodation. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm familiar that Reynolds ran advertising. I don't remember that they used accommodation.
They did. I mean, that I took the deposition on Monday of the CEO of Reynolds, and we went through some of the ads, and without question that word appears. Now, in looking at the Philip Morris ads and the R.J. Reynolds ads, although different, but they still use the word accommodation. You know, that's the way to resolve these problems, as opposed to having government attempt to resolve these problems. Was that a campaign that was worked on together between Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, or did each company work totally independent of the other?
I think at Philip Morris, the accommodation effort started before I returned to domestic tobacco. But I would feel very comfortable in saying that those were developed independently of each other.
I don't know.
A document, William L. Dunn Jr., Philip Morris Research Center, Richmond, Virginia, motives and incentives in cigarette smoke. I'd like to have that marked as plaintiff's Exhibit 11.
Somebody got a copy of that one, we can give the report.
Thanks.
So you now have plaintiff's Exhibit 11 in front of you. William L. Dunn Jr., who is he?
Bill Dunn, is there a date on this memo?
They're talking about a conference that occurred, referred to as the St. Martin Conference in January of 1972. I think that's
Okay, that's fair enough. The Bill Dunn here would be Bill Dunn, who worked in Philip Morris R&D in Richmond, research and development.
the beginning of the second paragraph. Is it Mr. Dunn or Dr. Dunn?
I do not know.
Okay. Quoting him, the cigarette should be conceived not as a product, but as a package. The product is nicotine. And then go down several lines where he says, think of the cigarette pack as a storage container for a day's supply of nicotine. Now, if you just look at that language, what I've read, would you not agree that Dunn seems to be talking about nicotine as a drug of some kind?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't know that that's what it says.
Okay. He certainly, at least that portion of what I've read, and obviously I've not read the whole thing, he's saying that the bottom line and the key and the essence and the reality of smoking is getting at that nicotine. That's what smoking is all about, nicotine.
I think that's a reasonable conclusion. I mean, I don't know if it's reasonable or slightly overstated or what it is, but I'm not going to quibble with you that he's certainly focused on nicotine here.
Dated September 8, 1971, from Dunn, Johnston, Ryan, and Shari to Eichhorn. Subject of this interoffice correspondence is plans for 1972. The first sentence in the second paragraph on the first page says, our plans now are to concentrate upon that nicotine delivery range between 0.3 and 1.2 milligram with a systematic manipulation of the nicotine-tar ratio at incremental nicotine levels within this range. Have I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, Dr. Eichhorn was who? Back in 71.
I don't remember but I think it's fair to guess he was an executive in R&D.
Okay. You know any of the other people? Dunn?
Dunn, Johnston, Ryan, I know who they are. Shari, I don't know.
Okay, that's all I have on Plaintiff's Exhibit 12. Plaintiff's Exhibit 13, document dated May 7, 1968, apparently from Durd, W. Durd, to G. Berman. The title of which is TPH Intake by Smokers. Who is Durd and who is Berman, if you know?
Berman was probably a gentleman named George Berman. I don't know what role he would have played at that time. And I read this as Dunn, not Durd, but maybe I'm...
You're probably right. You're probably right. What does TPH mean?
I don't know.
Now, the second sentence says, since there is evidence that the smoker adapts his puff, it is reasonable to anticipate that he adapts to maintain a fairly constant daily dosage. And then we go down toward the bottom, the last paragraph. We are currently negotiating with a PhD psychologist. If he joins us in September, as hoped, I plan to have him devote 2/3 of his time to basic psychological research. We would want to institute a study of individual differences in inhalation quite early in his program. Do you know whether this research was carried out?
No, I do not.
Okay. Next. Next plaintiff's exhibit, which is what, 19? Plaintiff's exhibit 19 is a letter from H. Wakeman, Vice President, Corporate Research and Development, to Senator Earl Clemens of the Tobacco Institute. I do not notice a date on this.
It's stated, I think it's 1970 something. Yes.
Where'd you get that? Right. In the second paragraph, toward the bottom, our medical research, follow along with me if you would.
Okay.
Our medical research support efforts through CTR and AMA have been confusing and contradictory in the public eye because we have, on the one hand, proclaimed these endeavors to be aimed at finding the truth about smoking and health, and at the same time, denied the existence of a problem. And then going down into the next paragraph, the second sentence, smoking is unquestionably psychologically and physiologically gratifying and therefore beneficial to the majority of smokers. We could do more research on the psychological and sociological aspects of smoking with a better understanding of the gratifications associated with smoking. We could stress these in our public defense of the industry. I feel confident many smokers, our best public supporters, will respond most favorably to evidence that they have justifiable psychological reasons for smoking. My only other feeling along this line is that our industry should develop a more favorable public impression by letting it be known that it is supporting quite a bit of unrestricted medical research as a pro bono publico gesture. This, in my opinion, is actually the case with about half of our CTR and AMA expenditures, maybe not intentionally, but much of the grant work has little or no relevance to smoking or health, in my opinion. Why not capitalize on this fact by putting our contributions in this light instead of advertising them as a selfishly oriented program to get at the truth about smoking and health? Nobody believes we are interested in the truth on this subject. And the fact that a multi-billion-dollar industry has put up $30 million to this over a 10-year period cannot be impressive to a public which at the same time is told we spend upwards of $300 million in 1 year on advertising. We may be able to emphasize the benefits of smoking without talking about the risks implied by these statistics. Have I read that accurately?
Up to where you read.
Yeah, I know I didn't read the whole thing. Now, is Wakeman someone you knew?
Yes,
Is a vice president, corporate research and development, what is that, the number 2 person? in research and development?
No, I think at that time would have been the number one.
The number one person, okay. And this letter went to J.F. Coleman III, and what was his position?
Now, did we establish the date of the document?
No, it's in the 70s.
Well, I think all through the 70s, Mr. Coleman was chairman of the board of Philip Morris.
Okay, no Heiser?
Not sure, depends on the time, but probably, if it were early in the 70s, would have been president of Philip Morris USA.
And Goldsmith was?
He would have been head of operations at that time, having manufacturing and R&D under him.
Plaintiff's Exhibit 20, the next numbered exhibit, is dated December 8, 1970, from H. Wakeman to Mr. J.F. Coleman III. The subject is Best Program for the Council for Tobacco Research. Okay.
This is 527. This is the end of take 3 of the deposition of James Morgan. We are off the record. This is the beginning of take 4 of the deposition of James Morgan. It is 529. We are on the record.
Okay, the document, which will be Plaintiff's Exhibit 20, dated December 8, 1970, from H. Wakeman to Mr. J.F. Coleman III. The subject is Best Program for Council for Tobacco Research. And I'm simply going to read to you this paragraph. It has been stated that CTR is a program to find out the truth about smoking and health. What is truth to one is false to another. CTR and the industry have publicly and frequently denied what others find as truth. Let's face it, we are interested in evidence which we believe denies the allegation that cigarette smoking causes disease. If the CTR program is aimed in this direction, it is in effect trying to prove the negative, that cigarette smoking does not cause disease. Both lawyers and scientists will agree that this task is extremely difficult, if not impossible. Do you basically, that's the paragraph that's yellowed, and you basically agree with that?
I had no basis to have a judgment on it. This was something I wasn't involved in. It is Wacom, not Wake. Whatever you say.
Wacom?
Wacom.
Okay.
Okay. But in terms of the paragraph, I have no basis to make a judgment on it, other than it sounds like a little professional rivalry going on.
Between who?
Between Philip Morris scientists and CTR.
Okay, so the court reporter will mark Exhibit 20 later.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to see it.
Mark it and have a substitute. Otherwise I'll do that.
What's this next one, please? Dated October 25, 1978, from Seligman to the CTR file. This would be Plaintiff's Exhibit 21. October 25,
1978 from Seligman to the CTR file about a CTR meeting which occurred October 18, 1920, 1978. Okay, in the first paragraph, this sentence appears. So you want to hand it to the witness?
Just one?
Now,
That's their copy.
the sentence appears.
All right.
Yeah. So, over here first.
At the most recent meeting, Ed Jacobs was not present, but Ed Yeaman said that certain grants would be reviewed by council after receiving SAB approval. To your knowledge, why would there be a need for council to review any grants?
I don't know.
Okay. So this is Exhibit 21. A memo from J.L. Charles to Dr. Seligman, March 18, 1980, 2 pages. Subject, Nicotine Receptor Program, University of Rochester. And this would be Plaintiff's Exhibit 22. Okay. You got it, Mark? Okay. Follow along with me, Mr. Morgan. The first paragraph. Nicotine is a powerful pharmacological agent with multiple sites of action and may be the most important component of cigarette smoke. Nicotine and an understanding of its properties are important to the continued well-being of our cigarette business, since this alkaloid has been cited often as the reason for smoking, and theories have been advanced for nicotine titration by the smoker. Do you know what nicotine titration means? Okay. Now, Mr. Charles is saying in the first sentence in the last paragraph on page 1, the above is an excerpt from an introduction to the nicotine program which I wrote on December 1st, 1978. My views have not significantly changed since that time. Now on page 2, by the way, who is Charles, J.L. Charles?
He was, Jim Charles was a principal scientist at Philip Morris, R&D.
With a PhD in something or other?
Don't know that.
Okay. Second page, second paragraph. In summary, the nicotine receptor program at the University of Rochester is an integral part of our overall nicotine program. The combination of basic research on the pharmacology of the nicotine receptor combined with the capability to screen nicotine analogs for CNS activity complements our internal synthetic and behavioral efforts in the nicotine program. What was the nicotine program? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay. And the last sentence, however, if we do not have the basic research results this program will provide, we will not be in a position to respond if and when the pressures to change do occur. And I noticed that a copy of this has gone to Dr. T.S. Osteen. Who is that?
He would also be a scientist, or principal scientist at R&D.
Now, I asked you earlier today about a frank statement to cigarette smokers, and I believe you told me you had never read it. Okay, I'm giving you
a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now, that is not necessarily precisely the way it appeared in the newspaper, but word for word, a word here and there may be misspelled, but that's precisely what appeared in every major newspaper in America in January 1954. 54.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything in there with which you disagree? In terms of today? Is there any statement made in there that you would take issue with today?
I think that, we were talking 43 years ago.
Correct.
I don't know whether I take issue. I think some of the statements don't hold up as well today as they may have. I don't know, because I wasn't involved in 54, but I think some of the statements are not real solid today.
Okay. Let me ask you specifically about a couple of them. The statement is made that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes, referring to lung cancer. In the first column, 3, that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes, and it refers to lung cancer. That would still be, as I've understood your testimony today, that's what you say today. There's. I'm sorry.
I think you're mischaracterizing it. Doesn't want to go on.
Okay. I mean, I understood you to say there's evidence out there about statistical associations, and there's some epidemiological evidence. But today, as I've understood your testimony, you are still comfortable with the statement that there is no scientific proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes of lung cancer.
Well, rather than you characterize what I think, I'd rather just restate it.
Fine,
Okay.
fine.
I believe there is, you say epidemiological, statistical associations between smoking cigarettes and lung cancer. I accept that. I'm not sure, so I can't debate that, but I'm going to say it's a non-debatable factual issue. What I said was that for over 40 years, that the process by which you go from a lit cigarette to lung cancer in the human being has not been documented, validated, determined, and mostly, I should be careful saying this, I'm not sure it's even been speculated because it's so far from being understood. And therefore, to say the word cause, there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes, is an accurate statement if you're talking about the process. To say that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes if you're talking only about the epidemiological, statistical part of it is a little shaky statement, because I think most people agree there are statistical associations.
But insofar as the classical, precise definition of cause is concerned, we are in 1997 where we were in 1954.
Well, oh boy, I was born in 54, but my guess is...
No, I mean in terms of the language of the Frank statement, that there is no scientific proof that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer.
I think since 54 there's been a rather large advance in understanding the statistics of the issue, so I am saying that there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes, basing that opinion on the fact that the process by which it happens has not been articulated, proven, or validated, or even speculated.
And the only way we're ever going to be able to get an answer to that question is by doing additional research and funding additional research.
For me, and my use of the word cause, that would be true. Yes.
We could be sitting here, or our children could be sitting here 43 years from now and still saying we need more research.
Well,
You have no idea when there'll be an answer.
is that wrong if it's not been shown how it happened?
I think it's very wrong if people are dying in the meantime and it's ultimately proven and established that there is cause and ultimately proven and established to the satisfaction of the tobacco industry, and then all these millions of people who have died in the intervening 43 years. But you know, where our kids are here in 43 years still debating these same issues, nothing terrible about that.
Is that a question?
Yes.
I don't believe there's a debate. You and I are debating it because we're arguing over the word cause and the definition of cause. I don't believe there's a debate in our society, and if you believe, as I do, in the ultimate supremacy of adult-informed free choice, then I have to really debate in my mind whether it's better to act on what is assumed or whether it's better to act on what's known if the public belief is closer to what's assumed than what's known.
You don't believe there is a debate on the issue of cause?
In the public's mind?
Correct.
I believe, as I've said several times today, that I believe that the public assumes that smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer in some people. Sorry.
So there is a scientific consensus, a medical consensus, and a public consensus, in your opinion, on the issue of causation. And the only segment of society which does not join in that consensus is the tobacco industry.
I don't think that's a fair characterization.
Name another segment of society. You told me the public believes it, and they believe it based on the Surgeon Generals and the public health community and doctors. And I'm asking you, if you can name one other segment of society that doesn't believe cause has been scientifically established other than your industry. You can answer.
First of all, I believe you really should talk to Dr. Ellis about that, who's more attuned to what groups are saying what than I am. I believe there are a majority of people who, without getting into the details of the discussion we've had of the lack of process documentation, but the majority of people do believe that if you smoke cigarettes, you run a very high risk of getting lung cancer.
You'll never be satisfied on the issue of cause until it can be demonstrated to you that, okay, person smokes a cigarette and gets lung cancer.
Be satisfied, he's explained it.
Explain it one more time and we'll all go home.
I would like for me to sit here and look at you and have you ask me, do cigarettes cause lung cancer? I would like to be able to say to you, if the answer were yes coming from me, from my mind and my heart and my soul, I would like to say, yes, there is not only a statistical association, but you have convinced me because science now understands the process by which it happens. And in the absence of understanding the process by which it happens, we all can just rely on the statistical association, which gets into the fact that cigarettes may possibly cause cancer, and adults ought to know that.
If theoretically you became convinced that your product, if the process was so developed that you became satisfied, yes, cigarette smoking does cause lung cancer, would you get out of the tobacco business?
Is that a personal question?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't.
That's all I have.
Okay.
February 1987, report of the Department of Transportation to the United States Congress. Now, the committee, I think you already told us, submitted its recommendations to the Department of Transportation in, I believe, 1986, right?
I believe that's the case.
The Department of Transportation was required by Congress, by federal law, to respond to those recommendations, and did so in this report, right, Doctor?
I imagine they did. As I say, I wasn't following it terribly energetically at the time.
The Department of Transportation accepted in full or in part most of the recommendations of your committee, right?
I wasn't a party to that. I mean, I can't really testify to what FAA was doing when I wasn't watching.
It did not, however, accept your recommendation that smoking be banned on commercial flights, did it?
I can't argue with that, but I can't testify to it.
You wouldn't disagree if I told you the Department of Transportation quoted your finding that, quote, empirical evidence is lacking in quality and quantity for a scientific evaluation of the quality of airliner cabin air or of the probable health effects of short or long exposure to it. Wouldn't quarrel with that if I told you that's what they said, would you?
If you told me that's what they said, I wouldn't quarrel with that.
The Department of Transportation went on to say, we agree that exposure to ETS could be viewed as a problem by some crew and passengers. However, we believe that further study is needed before the department can propose a definitive response to this recommendation. Right? Don't disagree with that?
If that's what you're telling me they said, I can't disagree with it, but again, I can't testify to it. I wasn't part of it.
Now, you told us on direct examination that there was a hearing after your report, right? Or there was some sort of public meeting?
That was during the process of preparation.
Okay. And you had people come, interested people, I assume flight attendants, aircraft manufacturers, tobacco people, people who were interested in what you were doing, right?
That is correct, yes.
And you told us, and you told the jury, that the tobacco people said they didn't think the evidence supported a ban on smoking on commercial flights, right?
That's the gist of what they said. I don't think we'd got as far as recommending a ban by the time they gave their testimony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stedman.
Thank you.
Did we redirect?
Yes, Judge. Well, as a matter of fact, Dr. Stedman,